wow, what a 24 hours it has been in the sport of Formula One. There is so much to discuss. Sebastian Vettel starting the house of cards from collapsing all around it, and all the movements have started well in advance of the usual silly season, which we usually get, don't we, around about the time of Monza. I'm joined today to discuss it by Anthony Davidson, Damon Hill, Paul di Resta, Rachel Brooks, and first of all, Zak Brown, right in the middle of this. Zak, I should imagine this has been as much of a whirlwind for you as it has for everybody. You now have Daniel Ricciardo instead of Carlos Sainz. Tell us how this all came about.
Well, we're very excited, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We went after Daniel a couple years ago, and I think narrowly missed out. So we've been a fan of Daniel's for some time, and obviously he went to Renault, and then we brought on Carlos and Lando. Have done a fantastic job, and as things have played out, it's a weird season so far, given that it hasn't started. And we were out of contract with Carlos, and he had some opportunities. We're going to miss Carlos. He's done a fantastic job, and but now we got a 7-time Grand Prix winner in our car, and couldn't be more excited. And think the combination of he and Lando in 21 will be the most exciting driver lineup. But let's not forget, we got a pretty awesome lineup for the 2020 season.
Yeah, you do. But were you expecting this?
I've come to learn in Formula One, don't expect anything other than the unexpected. So yeah, we had a sense. We started talking to Carlos in the off season about his future with us, and I think he'd either want to drive for McLaren or Ferrari, and you can understand the reasons why. And we've stayed close to Daniel through ever since he left a Red Bull. So we kind of had a good sense we were going to end up with one of those two guys in our race car. And we've got a very strong, open relationship with Carlos and his management and his father. And so this didn't come as a surprise, as you can tell by how quickly we announced Daniel and how quickly Carlos announced what he was doing, that we were very joined up through this entire process.
Zach, I guess through that, the initial conversation you probably had with Carlos showed that he had other options out there. But going back to that, you said you were very close with Daniel a few years ago. Is a bit of that going into where you're going to be racing and having someone that is so good at that end of the grid and making those overtakes and pressing all the way to the end of Grand Prix and having that stability in your car going forward? Is that key to it?
Yeah, I think, as you all know, we're kind of on this road to recovery. And I think last year was a big step forward, and most importantly, was a step forward. And, with that, you need to have, the best of everything if you can get it. And I think in a relatively short period of time, the addition of Andreas as our team principal has been a great addition to the team. James Key's now started, and then a lot of the people you don't see behind the scenes, but ultimately contribute to a race team being successful. In the marketing department, finance, and HR. And so, restructured the entire leadership team. That took some time. They're now all in place. Andreas really has the race team where he wants it. His leadership team, and then of course, you want to have two great drivers, which we currently have today, but to be able to have a 7-time winner, someone that is the absolute benchmark, is great for the team, and also gives Lando a chance to step up and for us to see Lando in action against a 7-time winner. So I like the combination of our drivers.
Zach, I know you say you were obviously keeping tabs on Daniel since the move to Renault and before that as well, but did you ever consider Seb coming to the team, and what do you make of his decision to leave Ferrari? Do you think that's retirement for him?
Yeah, I think, obviously Seb's an awesome driver, 4-time champion. I think we were pretty far down the path in the off season and kind of knew we would land with either Daniel or Carlos. So never really entertained anyone beyond that. And especially with Seb's kind of late breaking news, we were pretty far down the path at that point. I think clearly it's not a nice environment inside the Ferrari garage at the moment with the drivers and management. It seems to not be a happy family at the moment, which I think is going to make for some pretty exciting racing in 2020, because I think we saw in Brazil the fireworks that were inevitable. They have been building up, so I'm anticipating more of that this year. And, I think it really depends. As Seb looks around, it doesn't look like there's a Mercedes opportunity for him. Doesn't look like there's a Red Bull opportunity for him. There's not a McLaren opportunity for him. Clearly not a Ferrari. So the next best is Renault. And then the question is, does Seb want to, go with a team that's, probably not going to win in 2021. It's a great team, and they too should be moving up the grid. But I think unless Seb wants to kind of restart a journey with a team that's back on a journey, then I think he'll end up probably leaving the sport, unfortunately.
Zach, I think a lot of people are fascinated by this aspect of Formula One, the kind of sneaking around the back of the teams that they drive for. Some drivers are up front, some drivers are in communication and clandestine phone calls and so forth. So when did all this move start? Because it wasn't so long ago you were hailing your Sainz and Norris pairing as kind of like the way forward from McLaren. So how long ago would this have started when you got wind of maybe things on the move?
Yeah, well, we didn't even really get wind of it. Carlos and I spoke about it. So it wasn't, kind of hearing stuff through the grapevine, which I think, to your point, is how the majority of these driver movements happen, is everyone's kind of sneaking around the back of motorhomes trying to have secret dates. Unfortunately, the relationship that we have with Carlos and Lando, and relationship that, we have with Fernando, we obviously brought him to Indy during an F1 season when he was still under contract with us, let him go race Le Mans. So I think McLaren has a bit of a different philosophy on our relationship with our people, including our drivers. So it was a conversation Carlos had with Andreas and I over the winter. Same conversation we had with him. So we actually needed to give him permission to go speak with Ferrari, and we gave him that permission. So it was all very above board, and I think you can see by the way we're eventually going to part. We're very much going to race together this year. He did a great video, which was straight from the heart. We didn't even know he was doing this video. That's something he did on his own. So I think there's a real affection for the Sainz and McLaren. It always will be. And I think it's great to see that drivers and teams can separate and there not be animosity, because I think if you look at some of the other movements, it looks like, unfortunately, there's some bad blood, yet those people still need to race together this year. So I'm quite proud of how we've all handled it.
Zach, we're all looking forward to seeing Daniel drive for you. I think, like you say, he's a true benchmark for Lando. He's still developing. He's shown his speed in qualifying, but Daniel, like you say, a proven race winner. Really excited to see him drive with you. But you've obviously got first-hand experience of taking on Carlos, watching him develop. And I personally saw him develop an awful lot when he joined your team. How do you think he's going to go? And were you surprised in that rate of development from taking on Carlos to where he ended up?
Yeah, Carlos, he did a better job than I even thought he was going to do. And obviously we wouldn't have signed him if we didn't think he was going to do a good job. But he really didn't make any mistakes. If you look kind of back to the Toro Rosso, I can remember in, Bahrain, when he kind of had that silly incident back in the Toro Rosso days when coming out of the pits, you didn't see any of those kind of rookie errors, which you expect from a young driver. So he showed real maturity, a lot of pace. Let's not forget he had a poor start to the season, getting caught out qualifying in Australia by Kubic's, I think it was a tire blowout. So he didn't really start scoring points first couple races. He worked really well with Lando. So I think he's very fast. He's a team player. I never felt nervous when Lando and Carlos were around each other on the track, where some of the other teams, you see the teammates get near each other and They seem to have magnets. And so I think he's going to go really well at Ferrari. I think he's going to give Leclerc a run for his money. I think he'll be really good for the Ferrari mold. So I'm, looking forward to seeing him. If they have a race-winning car, I think Carlos is going to win races.
Zach, how much has COVID economics played a part in what we're seeing right now?
I think from a driver standpoint, I don't really think it is. I think these movements would have potentially probably happened with or without COVID, because we started these conversations pre-COVID. So, a lot of other things COVID is doing to obviously impact all of our worlds. But I think this driver movement, this isn't the first time we've seen some exciting driver movement. And it's one of the fun parts of the sport is here we are making news, but yet we haven't turned a wheel in quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, that said, Daniel Ricciardo reportedly on something like 40 million US over a couple of seasons at Renault. That looks like smart business on his behalf if he was waiting to get towards a regulation change, and maybe he's hoping for great things for you, a team on the move. Maybe he's even thinking that you might eventually be effectively a Mercedes Works team. I don't know what's in the back of his mind, but what's your thoughts? Can you meet any of those demands? He's an expensive driver, but is he worth it? And is he a step up from Carlos, do you think?
Well, I think he's definitely worth it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it. What's been reported is not accurate, but he is a very well-paid racing car driver, and I think he's worth it. He's won 7 Grand Prix. I think in the right car, he's capable of winning a championship immediately. He's extremely marketable. From a commercial standpoint, he's a very exciting driver. I think the combination of he and Lando will be, awesome, and they'll be kind of the fan favorites on and off the track. And so I think, if I look back at the history of McLaren, it's been some time since we've not had either 1 or 2 world champions in the team and not having Grand Prix winners in the team. So I think it's definitely a step forward for us in our journey to have a Grand Prix winner in our car.
Zach, very good to have you on. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. I'm sure you've got plenty to get on with, but you're back in the MTC, just to say. When are you coming out of the shutdown?
We're not 100% sure yet, but probably a few weeks. It'll ultimately depend on when we officially get confirmation we're going to Austria. We think we probably need 5-6 weeks to prepare. So, soon, around the corner.
Top man. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
So there you go. That's the McLaren perspective. Where's anyone want to start? I mean, it was a whirlwind. I switched off my phone for an hour yesterday, switched it back on. I was like, whoa, what's been going on? And it was unbelievable, wasn't it? But I assume as soon as a seat at Ferrari becomes available, as it did, inevitably things are going to move pretty quickly.
This isn't the first time that Sebastian Vettel's rocked the F1 establishment, is it, Simon? I remember when we were in Suzuka that morning and he told the world that he was moving from Red Bull to Ferrari. That was a day and a half. And yeah, nobody expected that. And he's done it yet again. So, the big question was it on his terms? I believe it was. He was making all the noises that he was looking to retire sooner than later anyway. And I really feel with Seb that he started falling out of love with Formula One when we had the regulation change in 2014. He didn't like these bigger, heavier cars with the hybrid engines. He liked his small, narrow, blown floor diffuser Red Bull with the high revving V8 engines, normally aspirated. That was when he was in his element. And I think he never quite clicked. And because he didn't like these modern cars. And I think, his comment in Russia when the engine blew up, let's go back to the V12s. Not that he ever drove a V12, but, it just felt to me like he was constantly looking back at the glory years that he had. It must have been hard for him watching young guys coming up, like Leclerc taking the fight to him and beating him quite regularly, coming to blows on track, and the frustration of seeing the world championship slip away from you time and time again from the might of Mercedes and Lewis. I think he just became so frustrated. This was probably the final straw, you know, with the situation we're all in now, makes you reflect on life and what you want from it. Yeah, maybe he's just matured faster than a lot of other drivers. You know, you all age at different rates, and I believe it was on his terms. So he's rocked the world again in Formula One, and opened up this brilliant opportunity for all drivers. They must have been, I would have loved to have heard that have been a fly on the wall of Ferrari, hear all the phone calls from all the drivers, take me, no, take me. That would have been brilliant.
It's interesting because if you believe some of the stories doing the rounds that Seb sort of put it out himself on Monday evening before Ferrari were quite ready to release all the news, because he just knew that was it, he was going. But I think back and refer back to Monza last year, when I remember asking him in the pen, do you still love Formula One? Are you still in love with Formula One? And he kind of said he loves the racing and he loves Formula One, but he said you can't be happy if you're not enjoying it. And he clearly wasn't enjoying it at that point. But I just wonder, Paul, I mean, you know him probably the best of any of us on this call right now, that dream to win the championship with the Ferrari, the dream to emulate Michael Schumacher, that must have really, really hurt. There must have been a point of realization where it's really, really hurt him that he's not going to achieve that.
Sense of frustration has built, though, isn't it? And as soon as he's put under pressure by a teammate, he cracks and then kind of does something wild. I'm not so sure this is Seb's decision. I think he's the victim of something else that's gone on in the background. And I think probably from Brazil last year, the way that was dealt with, and what Zak just actually said, that this conversation's been happening a long time. And it's obviously been on good faith with Zak seeing the bigger picture, letting a driver move on, because you never know, you know, in a world you meet kind of twice and where it is. But Seb's not been delivering. I think the internal politics within Ferrari have been wearing him down. I know somebody that spoke to him after the announcement came out the other day that, you know, it was a kind of sense of relief there, the inner battles, and he kind of explained it to the same thing that Alonso had within Ferrari. Everything is on top of you. Although it's a great team, there's a sense of responsibility there. But if it's not happening, the world expects it to happen. They expect you just to be winning. And if it's not there, then we need to see where it is. But it's a big decision by Ferrari, you know, to put two guys in a car that have won 2 Grand Prix. You know, they've not ultimately led championships. They've not been under pressure. Can you lead the engineering team? On paper, it's great because it's young and fresh. But I honestly thought they would have went and put somebody a bit more stable in, just to let Charles have another few years with the pressure off him on that side of things.
Well, of course, they had quite a long run with John Alesi, who only ever won 1 race. So, but that team, the Berger Alesi teamwork was quite good. But I tend to agree with you, Paul. I'm not convinced that this wasn't, you know, did he jump or was he pushed? I think there was an element of both. I think the pressure on Seb was uncomfortable. I think that he maybe brought a lot of that pressure upon himself. There were a number of massive gaffes. I mean, Singapore colliding with his teammate, and you know, I think there was, you know, you go back to Brazil last year. I just felt the pressure was building on some of his gaffes. You know, his Baku incident. What was that all about? So I think that Ferrari must have been coming to him and saying, listen, we need you to not crash and not cause strife and disobeying team orders and stuff like that. I think he found it very difficult. And I think the rug was pulled. Mark Hughes wrote a good article. I think he basically pointed our attention towards the very beginning of Seb's contract, when actually Montezemolo moved and the whole background to Ferrari changed. And I think he found himself in not the environment that the cozy, welcoming environment, protective environment that I think he wanted to have or expected to have, the one that certainly Michael Schumacher had when he was at Ferrari. So I think he was on shifting sands the whole time. And Seb's not the kind of guy who copes well, I think, as you alluded to, with that lack of sense of protection around him. And so maybe he just felt very uncomfortable and decided he wanted to get out of there. Where he goes next is the next question. Or
the conspiracy theories say that potentially Ferrari's in a rebuild phase. And actually that car is not a good one this year. Coupled with the fact that Charles Leclerc has come in and become the number one, de facto number one, he's thinking, this isn't the place for me. Paul, can I come back to you on this one? What do you think about that? Is there one more trick up Sebastian Vettel's sleeve? He's always been a very close confidant of Bernie Ecclestone. Bernie probably still knows what's going on on the inside of Formula One. Do you think he thinks there's half a shot, and imagine this, that he could get into that second Mercedes alongside Lewis Hamilton?
You took the words out of my mouth. The only way he can resolve this is to go head-to-head in that Mercedes with Hamilton. That is the only way he's going to save his face for the kind of inconsistent years that he's had within Ferrari and that dominance he had at Red Bull. He needs to go up against a teammate that's going to push him all the way, and Lewis is the best wheel-to-wheel racer. He's clean, he's crafty, he gets the job done. Seb's got age on his side compared to Lewis as well.
He's 32. He's 32. Yeah. You remember that. He's
still got time, but he's a very calculated character. He thinks about things. I think way more than others. But I think people forget how much Seb puts into the sport as well. And somewhere he will be involved. But I think he's only faced with, and the only challenge he can really do is drive a Mercedes or retire and do something big. And he could potentially run for FIA president because of the reputation he's got within the paddock and what he's done with the GPDA. I really think that's a role that he could take on. But I'd love to see him in a car against Lewis. And I think the battle with Verstappen, Leclerc, the German dream as well with him under the power of that.
I just want to add, sorry about this, just jumping in, but I think there is an assumption that it would be alongside Lewis Hamilton. I mean, Lewis has yet to conclude his contract as far as I know. I mean, it's not nice having another multiple world champion floating around when you're trying to do a deal with your own team.
Yeah.
I also want to add up from my chat with George Russell yesterday. I definitely think there is something lined up for 2021 at Mercedes for George Russell. Reading between the lines, whatever you want to call it, but I definitely feel his ties with Mercedes. I think there is still something there for. I know he's got his contract with Williams, but there'll be something in there where he can get out and go to Mercedes in 2021. I
agree with you, Rachel. I think that would be a smart move. You think about what's happening now, Anne. If I could come to you on this one, everything that seems to be going down within the paddock is the changing of the guard, which we've been anticipating for a while. With Vettel, such a senior driver, leading one of the senior team, that now leaves you with Max, Alexander Albon, the best driver, along with Max, I think. Lewis Hamilton. We're going to get in the top 3 or 4 teams now. We're going to get races. We're going to get 7 or 8 of the best drivers, aren't we, in those positions, which can only be good for the sport. I think
it's really exciting. It is really exciting. You see, like you say, the changing of the guard. You see the young drivers coming through, and this new wave of talent that we have in Formula One is very exciting. We've seen such close wheel-to-wheel action all the way through last year. And it's only going to improve, I feel, with Carlos now going up against Charles Leclerc, such a feisty driver who's still improving every time he jumps in the car. And the same to be said about Carlos as well, of course. So look, I'm really excited to see the future generation improve. I think that the racing is going to be great. The one avenue that Zak touched on that we haven't is Vettel back to Red Bull. That's the other way that he could kind of redeem himself, go up against definitely one of the best, maybe the fastest driver in Formula One, Max Verstappen. I mean, if you could be brave enough to go up alongside him, and let's be fair, let's be brutally honest, none of the young Red Bull drivers have really proved themselves yet. Alex, he did a great job getting thrown in at the deep end last year. For me, he hasn't fully proven himself against the likes of Max Verstappen yet. You've got a clear number 1 driver there, a weakened lineup, perhaps compared to what we saw from Ferrari last year and especially Mercedes. It was like a one-handed fight most of the time, wasn't it? Let's be fair, with Red Bull, and Max was really hauling that car around, and Gasly or Albon couldn't really match him when all things were being fair. So there could potentially be a place for Seb to come crawling back, cap in hand, to the team that created him, and that would be a perfect way for him to kind of show the world that he's still got it.
We know he asked last year, don't we? We know he asked to go back to Red Bull last year. So is a pay cut at Red Bull more palatable to him than a pay cut at Ferrari?
And Red Bull it wasn't a flat no, Alonso style, was it? It was. I remember the comments at the time. They entertained the idea, at least Helmut Marko did.
I'll put this to you then. Carlos Sainz goes to Ferrari. Does he go to Ferrari as Charles Leclerc's number 2? I think, and I'll come back to what you were saying, Anthony, I think that Carlos Sainz probably has the measure of Charles. I think there's some classy driver and could beat him. Do you think
definitely classy driver? You know, he's a survivor. He finishes. He's very polished now and still improving. But Charles he's damn fast. And I think once Charles irons out the mistakes, which, you know, they're inevitable when you first join a top team like Ferrari. In your early years, you're going to see mistakes. Zak said the same thing about Carlos, you know, in his early years. So, I think it'd be a very close fight. I'm excited to see it. But I think on paper, we'll yet to find out, but I doubt he signed a 5-year deal like Charles Leclerc has. I doubt it's 5 years. And for me, like when we saw in Red Bull, Max signed a multi-year deal, and that was the thing that hurt Daniel Ricciardo's pride amongst everything else, was the fact that was a clear statement by the team. Yeah, he's the number 1 driver.
No, Simon, I just want to add on that one, which is that, I mean, Carlos he's a mature, he's not irrational. He's a mature driver. And I think they feel that they've got a good, safe teammate for Charles. You know, he can hold his own against Charles. I'm sure he can, and maybe equal him. And if he can do a good job, he can stay there for a long time. I think that his maturity. I think Zak alluded to it. You know, Carlos is a class act. You know, he's done the right thing. He's created friends wherever he's gone. The door is still open at McLaren if he wants to go back. I'm sure. You know that he's that sort of attitude. I think is what they're after, what they bought when Ferrari looked at Carlos Sainz, along with his performances in the car. You know, Seb, you have to say, is cantankerous. You know, he can be quite difficult, and I think that's unsettling for the team.
Charles has got an extra year. He is the lead driver now, undoubtedly, with Vettel moving on. He's got to take the ropes. He's got to lift that team. He's born and bred into Ferrari, and when you win the Monza Grand Prix last year, you've embraced the Italian fans. Yes, Carlos Sainz is this new guy coming in, very likeable, but somehow Charles, I think, has got the momentum. I've got to agree with Ant. I think it'll be a tough ask for Sainz to beat Leclerc. I think he's got the natural ability, and I think he's got the backing of the senior members in the team to drive everything he has and they have to achieving that goal. Because, you know, if you look at Formula One of recent years, you can only really focus on one driver. That's Verstappen at Red Bull, it's Hamilton at Mercedes, and then you've got Leclerc. And I think it's setting it up that if you have a bad day, the next guy in line can just be there and just do enough to secure the result.
Can I mention something here we haven't talked about yet? Fernando Alonso back to Renault, because Renault put a picture out on Wednesday. They do their wallpaper Wednesday. It was Alonso winning in France in July 2004. Alonso replied to it with a big crowd all in the Renault blue watching on. And then Flavio Briatore's put a picture out as well. Renault, Fernando winning July 2004. What do you think is going on there? Do you think we'll see Fernando back in the paddock? And we know he was in Abu Dhabi last year, wasn't he? Pretty much pitching to everybody, being very amenable to the media and to everyone he came across. Will we see him back at Renault?
Rachel, can I respond to that? I mean, I think, you know, where is Renault going? That's the question, really. You know, why would you leave? Why would Daniel Ricciardo leave Renault? You know, he can see a better opportunity at McLaren. And I think that Fernando Alonso is not someone who wants to come back to Formula One and struggle again, you know, with an uncompetitive car. He left because he didn't have one. So, you know, these guys, they want the top, you know, they don't want second-rate equipment. They want the best equipment.
And that's what he said, didn't he? That's what he said when he left last time. He said, look, he's only going to come back if it's a championship winning car. He was also on 30 million US in his last year at Renault. So I wonder, I mean, there are talks that, you know, Liberty might be involved in trying to bring Fernando back to Renault. So if not him, then Paul, who else at Renault? Are they going to go for an all-French lineup? Could we have Pierre Gasly, Romain Grosjean, or are they going to go with Guan Yu Zhou or somebody, you know, a little bit left field? But are they going to have to cut costs on their driver, on their second driver? Probably, aren't they?
Potentially. I think what they'll do is probably leave it open for a little bit. I guess what you've got to see is how Ocon's going to do. because of the situation we're in at the moment, they're being denied of that. So I think you've got to give him time to see how he kind of goes along. You've got Nico Hülkenberg sitting there, who was in the team doing a very good job as well, that could almost have taken 6 months out and then come back into the hot seat. But they've got to kind of save, the best to the very end. I think now that those seats are kind of decided, I think people want to see track action before anything goes forward, unless you've got a box office ticket like Sebastian Vettel wanting the challenge, or Fernando Alonso. But I would, with the politics that went on with Christian and Cyril, I couldn't imagine what Fernando and Cyril would be like, if they had a disagreement. Because Fernando comes with passion, and I think I've got to agree with Damon. You need to have that ability within it to drive forward, and it's a hard ask at Renault, especially with stability in the regulations at the moment, and that doesn't look like it's going to change for a couple of years. So I don't see any light too soon at the end of that tunnel. Okay,
let me just quote then Cyril Abiteboul about this. In our sport, and especially now, reciprocated confidence, unity and commitment are critical values for a works team. So I should imagine it's not going to be easy for Daniel Ricciardo for the rest of this season. He's sort of left under a cloud, didn't he, from Red Bull? He's doing the same at Renault, but he's gone to McLaren. He's a very personable driver. Could we see, do you think, Valtteri Bottas in a Renault, if what Rachel's talking about, and potentially if the moves play out, maybe George Russell moves up to that, do you think Bottas might be an option for Renault, Anthony?
In all of this, I always feel sorry for Bottas, because he let's not forget the amount of pole positions that he had over Lewis Hamilton. That's no mean feat. So and without Lewis there, Bottas would have been champion. So he does a great job for that team. I think the dynamic works really well between the two of them. Lewis gets on well with him. I think it's likewise. There's never any blows between the two cars out on track, and it's a nice relationship, and they keep winning everything. They're first and second, and everyone's always going on about, let's get rid of Bottas. Who's he going to be replaced with? And you think, well, the guy's doing a good job. He's, you can't have two Lewises there. We've seen that go wrong in the past many times. I think the strength of Ferrari back in its day, when it had Schumacher there was a clear number one and always a clear number two, and they won everything. And Mercedes are doing the same thing now. And but it's always the chat about who's Bottas going to be replaced by. So I don't know, maybe he will. And Rachel touched on George Russell. I think at some point he's going to need to be tested out. You can't look at really what he's doing in a Williams at the back of the grid and make head nor tail about how good the guy is. Personally, I think he's very good. I'm excited for Britain that we've got a real hot talent there that's going to shine in the future. But he needs to be tested properly. Where do you place him? That's the difficulty, I think, for the team.
I agree with that on George. Definitely a talent for the future. But talking about Valtteri, whether he goes to Renault, really you're not talking about whether or not Valtteri goes to Renault. It's who's going to go to Mercedes, and they've got to think about the future and how much longer is Lewis Hamilton going to go on. I mean, this COVID thing has totally put a great big boulder in the path of his ambition to equal Michael Schumacher's 7 world titles. We don't know. That's not something you could have expected. It's definitely a black swan that's suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and it may change everything, because Lewis is definitely getting on in his career. I'm not saying he can't go on for longer, but he's thinking of the future, and the Mercedes will have to think of the future as well. And so, what if his demands become unreasonable, or he's not happy, carrying on racing or whatever? They've got to think of the next 5 years. Does Lewis fit into the next 5-year plan?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Damon, with the future at Mercedes, because if you look at the way things have handled, I mean, it ended up so toxic with Nico Rosberg there with Lewis, bringing Valtteri in. There's a harmony in the team that they're all appreciating. But I think it's given Lewis the opportunity to try and go for those 7 titles. But I think this is the last year they're giving him that opportunity with a teammate like Valtteri. Valtteri's a fantastic driver, of course he is, but we know Lewis has got the measure of him. I think that's it. They're looking at the future, and 2021 will be a change. And it will be a real shame for Valtteri, because we've seen what he can do when he really puts his mind to it. But I think that's the way Mercedes are looking. They're looking at the future and they're making plans, I guess, for beyond Lewis already.
The thing is, I guess, though, Rach, with Mercedes is one day, when Lewis decides to retire, it's quite easy for the top team just to cherry pick who you put in as your number 1 driver. You can get anyone. They'll break contracts to come, and they'll fall over themselves to come and drive for you. The top team, like Damon said, everyone wants to be in the best team. You'll get the best driver on the grid in your car. When you've got the fastest car, that's pretty easy. But still the question remains, how do you, and this is the sticking point for the team, I feel, how do you test out George Russell, who is a great talent, but is kind of yet to be seen in many ways? How do they play that relationship? How do they play that with Bottas and George? That's the real fascination. But in terms of the number 1 driver, why bring in a number 1 driver now to dovetail it with the departure of Lewis? I don't necessarily think you need to do that when you've got such a strong package.
Toto believes in Valtteri. It was his investment that got him to Formula 1. And I think Valtteri knows he kind of owes it to him to have that respect. But the other thing, which we haven't seen the clear picture of, Valtteri's changed his life quite a lot personally. And you've seen a very different Valtteri over the past 6 months, even if it's only a glimpse on social media of the way he's gone about it. And he said that was going to show on track. Now, Nico Rosberg said, he couldn't stand what he had to do to try and get on top of Lewis, and he had to change his life and retire. So, Lewis is not completely unbeatable, and, the season could play it different. And then, you've got to have the belief, like you're saying, because Lewis is getting on and Valtteri's a bit younger. That continuity in the team is key. And then the next person you bring in, it's about being at the right time at the right place. And yes, George would want to do that now because he's fresh, but maybe in 3-4 years' time, when that gets that chance, there's somebody else already in the pipeline. And that's where the circles of Formula 1 are not always fair.
Last thing to throw into the mix is the emergence, if you like, of Aston Martin, and what's going to happen with that, and what is that going to become, and what of Toto's link to it, and what of the ambitions of Lawrence Stroll, and what's that? What is that going to become? I mean, is this an emerging force that is just going to blow everything we've just said out of the water, Anthony?
Well, I was just thinking exactly the same thing, Simon. That could be with a Mercedes engine in the back of it, and a car that looks very similar to the Mercedes from what we've seen so far, goes in a pretty similar way as well. What a great opportunity for Russell to jump into that car, the close relationship, with that Mercedes engine in the back of it, to really show what you can do in a good car, much closer to the sharp end of the field. The problem is that obviously Perez is bringing money to the team, so that's very much needed, especially in these times, and will be for the next couple of seasons, I should imagine, with the knock-on effects that we'll see. So Perez, and he does a great job, he deserves his place there. And you've got Stroll there. He's not going anywhere because his dad owns a team. So he's going to be, so like Paul was saying, it's right time at right place. And I just can't see a way in for George anywhere at this point, which is really frustrating for him.
Simon, I'm still confused about Toto's involvement with the Aston Martin thing. I mean, how does this fit with Mercedes, role of Mercedes? It seems a bit of a distraction to me.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, the fact is that they're going to keep their cards close to their chest. Apparently it's all to do with the road cars. Apparently it's nothing to do with the F1 team. It's just a very well-placed and potentially profitable shareholding that he's taken up in the company. But I don't know. I don't smell a rat, but I smell something going on, don't you, PDR?
Listen, all the way through, people have questioned the involvement Toto's had in different teams, whether that was HWA, then Williams, then he was still involved in Williams when he then became the motorsport boss at Mercedes-Benz. He's obviously a shareholder within the Mercedes-Benz GP team, but he's also the motorsport boss representing the whole of Mercedes-Benz across the board. So, it's compliance, but there's nothing more stricter than Daimler and how they do it. And if they're happy with the consent, a bit like what Zak was saying, that the consent and the good faith that they gave to Carlos to speak to Ferrari, you've got to look at the bigger picture. As long as he's delivering the goods, I think you've got to give him credit, and he's managed that team superbly over the short period that he's had there and the dominance it's had. So if he's keeping everything in the box ticking exercise, then I think you've got to let him be happy and look for the future.
I love it. I mean, I love it. We've been going round and round in circles for 8 weeks. Sebastian Vettel says, I'm leaving Ferrari. And then all of a sudden, I think it's the most eventful 24 hours in any sport throughout this whole lockdown, isn't it? It's our sport. So it's great that we've got so much to talk about. We could go on and on for hours and hours and hours, but we won't. We're going to move it on. And for the sake of this, we've been picking all week. We've been picking our favourite moments to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Formula One. So let's move it on to us five. And ladies first, Rach, what do you pick for us?
Well, I've picked Spain 2012, and I know for a lot of people it's not a classic race. Why would you pick that? And maybe it's lockdown, got me a little bit emotional, but I was thinking about it. And obviously, I'm not going to talk about races before I was born. And then when I started watching like late 80s, early 90s, I could have picked your Senna Prost in 89, or I could have picked Damon, Ewan Schumacher in 1994. But I went for something that happened when I was working in the sport. So Spain 2012, my second race. We had 4 different winners at the first 4 races. It was building to be a great season. Lewis, Seb, Fernando, top 3 drivers in the championship. We got to Spain thinking that run was going to be broken. And then we had qualifying. Lewis on pole, Pastor Maldonado of all people, P2. And then Saturday evening, the drama started. Lewis gets put to the back of the grid because he didn't have enough fuel in his car. So then we're thinking, okay, Pastor Maldonado's on pole, but he's got Fernando Alonso alongside him on the front row. Alonso will win it. Ferrari car, home crowd, foregone conclusion almost. And then on the Sunday, everything changed. And Fernando got to turn 1 first, of course, but then Pastor undercut him in the second pit stop. We had 3 pit stops in the race as well that day for him. Amazing race. And then Pastor had a problem in his final pit stop. Alonso caught up a little bit, but for 18 laps, Pastor Maldonado defended with everything he had from Fernando Alonso. And eventually Alonso's tyres fell away and Pastor Maldonado took the most unlikely win. So we had strategy, we had an underdog winning a race, we had all the drama going on already. We had Sir Frank Williams' 70th birthday, who has such a story in Formula One on its own. It's quite incredible. And then we get to the post-race celebrations, and it's amazing, and everyone's happy for Williams and celebrations around. And then that moment where we all sort of started to smell and see the smoke from the Williams fire. And I remember coming into Formula One, everyone told me what a great family it was and what an atmosphere it was. But my second race, you're still learning, you're still pretty terrified even walking into the paddock, I thought anyway. But I remember walking down the paddock and seeing people rushing towards Williams. And when I got to the back of the Williams garage, just members from all different teams putting hoses in, trying to help. And then going round into the pit lane, and I remember finding the guy from Force India with the soot and the ash on his face and sitting him down on the pit wall, and one of his guys came over and took him to the medical centre. And I remember looking to my left, and I can still see it now, and seeing somebody from every team, every shirt, helping out with the fire extinguishers and helping to help Williams to put the fire out, and all coming together. And it was quite a sight. And then the guy from Russia wheeling in this trolley with bottles of water on it for everybody, and everyone coming together. And it was quite a moment. And then afterwards, everyone helping Williams, giving them parts for the next few races because so much had been destroyed. And to me, that weekend epitomised everything we love about Formula One. We had an underdog winning. We had champions trying to do their best. We had conspiracy theories about whether or not Williams had some special tyres that weekend. We had the birthday of a legend in the sport. And then we had the whole paddock coming together in a way that I've not seen in any other sport I've worked in. So for me, yes, maybe lockdown's got me emotional, but that weekend for me just brought all of Formula One together for me in a really sort of nice way. And yes, there were bad moments, but wow, so much good came out of it. So yeah, that's me.
There you go. I remember that. I mean, it was 7 winners, wasn't it, in the first 7 races in the end. And yeah, one of our cameramen was in there playing a hero's role too. It was amazing. It was amazing. Damon, right, come on then. you've gone for something from the annals of history.
Well, not that long ago. I mean, it was certainly a while back. It wasn't within Rachel's experience. I probably wasn't even born, Rachel, when this race happened. I don't know. I'm sure she wasn't. But in 1979, Dijon, it is an epic, iconic race, really, I think, in the history of Formula One, modern Formula One. I would separate out what happened in the 50s and the 60s. This is now moving on to the kind of Formula One that we understand today, where drivers biff each other with their cars and basically use a lot of muscle and get their elbows out. So you can't get a better race than Dijon against Villeneuve and Arnoux, two numbskulls, I would say, competing, who were not prepared to give an inch. And it's an absolute classic. It's on the last. It builds up a few laps before the end, but then on the last lap, they really go for it. But it's only for second place. But it stopped Renault getting a 1-2. Jabouille won the race with the turbo Renault, and there were ground effect cars as well. So they could actually get their wheels in between each other, and they could use the side pods a bit. So it's a little bit like touring cars, and very memorable. Talk about track limits. I mean, this is way before we started moaning about cars going off the track and overtaking on the grass. But somehow it's something heroic about what they were up to.
Did you just call Gilles Villeneuve a numbskull?
Yeah. I mean, he was a rocket, wasn't he? Let's be honest. I mean, he was someone who was prepared to do anything to win and biff you out of the way. I mean, heroic, but also, you love him for it. You love. That's why he was loved by Enzo and many, many fans. Right.
PDR. Next up.
Something, when they sent us through to this challenge to kind of come up with the moments, when they were all kind of, the emails were coming in with people's moments. I mean, it's remarkable, the sport and all the different things that people think about and what grabs them. And, some stand out more than the others, and there's certainly bigger things. But I'm a bit like Rachel. I went for a moment that kind of grabs me, and it grabbed me to Formula One. I was 7 years old at the time. Damon was actually racing in it. It was the 93 Donington European Grand Prix when Senna had that epic first lap. And it just kind of gripped me for what the sport was. When I watched it back last week as well, to see the first lap that he did, the confidence, and it just made me want to do Formula One. And I think that all the way through it, it takes you back to things like that. Even to this day, when I heard when Senna had sadly passed away, I know where I was standing. And I think that's something that shows the unity of what Formula One is and what a small family is, especially in circumstances like we are in the moment. But to see somebody that has got the status and still that reputation, doing the business in a car that was obviously weaker than its opponents, and it just gives you inspiration still driving just now, that hopefully you can try and have 10% of a moment like that he had, and people will look back on it one day, and it's still special to this day to watch it.
I'm biffing you out the way, Damon.
Sorry,
biffing
Simon.
you out the way, didn't he? I mean,
I had my chance to stop his the most epic first lap of the history of motorsport, and I just sort of let him pass. I was so frightened of making a complete balls up because I'd already made a balls up in the first race of the championship. So I'm stupid, really.
Well,
anyway.
Yeah, there you go. These things happen, apparently. And
yeah, so I chosen, like Rachel and Paul, have chosen something that's quite close to my heart. Something that meant a lot of the time. I was involved with the team at Braun, 2009 Melbourne Grand Prix. Not that anything spectacular happened in the Grand Prix itself. It was more the fairy tale backstory to that race with the team in Brackley. I'd been with the team for many a year, test driving from 2002 pretty much all the way through up until that 2009 season. We all know the story behind the demise of Honda. I felt that myself when I was at Super Aguri. That was the first sign that Honda were pulling out of the main team as well. Left me without a drive at the early stages of 2008. And so I went back to Brackley to be their test driver with Honda and then watch the team crumble and almost completely vanish, like we saw with Toyota when they disappeared from Formula One. It was hard times. I saw many friends in the team lose their jobs, and it went from a team of around 800 to 900 personnel strong to just over 400. It was pretty tough times. But I was already doing in the early stages of their simulator work back then. And I'll never forget, after the first test that they had, when they actually got that Mercedes engine in the back of the car, they plumbed in all the numbers into the simulator. And I went out and I did a couple of laps. And I remember thinking, it was at Barcelona like they usually used. I remember thinking, this is wrong. I stopped on track. I said, there's something wrong, guys. I'm upshifting way too early. I've got way too much power. The lap times are way too quick compared to what we normally do in here. All they'd done was plumb in the new engine power settings and stuff, all the numbers. And there was a moment of silence, and they went, yeah, that's pretty much what the real drivers said as well in real life. And it was at that moment where I thought, wow, this car is going to be something else. And they did that test in Barcelona. I asked James Vowles, who's now chief strategist at Mercedes, I asked him at the time, how's it going, mate? It's not like now where you see all the live times and Sky are there filming it all. I texted him, said, how's it going, mate? And he just wrote back on a text saying, one word, rocket ship. And I sent him one back saying, well, that's 2 words, but it's really good to know. And we all arrived in Melbourne. We're still not sure, especially teams outside of the practice. They'd seen these fast times in testing, but they weren't quite sure. Was there a bit of cheating going on in testing? The car was completely bare of sponsors. Were they just doing that to try and get some sponsors on? And no, the speed was still there. And I remember Ross Brawn walking around with all the lawyers, because they had the double diffuser that was, right on the edge, wasn't it? And Toyota and Williams had done the same, and they were walking around with the lawyers there with all their paperwork under their arms, marching to the stewards room. And just the crescendo really was pole position and race victory in second place. But that whole backstory to it, I mean, if you wrote it in Hollywood, no one would have believed it at the time. It really is something I'm not sure we'll ever see again in Formula One. It's such a competitive sport, and you have to be so good to win. It was quite unbelievable, and it still gives me goosebumps to this day.
And we've got the new regs coming up as well. So there's still the chance that someone might just discover something. One of the underrated teams might find a sort of double diffuser kind of loophole in the regs somewhere and do the same thing again. It's incredible, isn't it? How, if you can get through the regulations, you can find such a massive time game. Absolutely. And,
who's to say that we've got a crystal ball now and you see Daniel Ricciardo's move to McLaren and they hit it right with that Mercedes engine in the back, and they get something right that no one else has seen coming, and Ricciardo wins the world championship. I mean, it's as crazy as that in what happened at Braun then. So, and that's what's great about our sport, is that, yes, a lot of the time it's inevitable. And you see a Mercedes go out there and get pole and win the race again and again. And we've seen it with Ferrari in the past and Red Bull. But every once in a while, there's a little gem that comes along and it revolutionizes everything and resets what you think you know about the sport.
And that actually brings me quite nicely on to the one I picked. I picked it because it's from the year of my birth, but it's also because I believe that sport is all about the underdog. I think that's why we all love sport, is to see the underdog winning. And in this sport, you don't often see that happen, do you? Let's face it, usually the best car wins. So I'm going back to Zandvoort in 1975, and James Hunt and that bunch of aristocrats took the fight, didn't they, as underdogs to the mighty Ferrari in that Hesketh, the 308, wasn't it? And he basically tipped it down before the start of the race. He was the first to go into slicks, and he led for the last 20 laps. He was held out Nicky Lauda, didn't he, coming in that Ferrari, and he won the race by 1 second. and it was one in the eye for the establishment, and it was the one for the garagistas, and I think it was just a great win by a bunch of English toffs, wasn't it? Let's face it.
This is the best thing about it, is if you'd been the right age at the time, we all know you'd have been friends with them.
Well, you couldn't be a toff. No. But I would have minded some champagne and some caviar with bubbles and the gang.
You'd have loved, honestly, Simon, you would have fitted in beautifully there at the Hesketh team. They were absolute, they were amateurs in the right sense. They did it because they loved it, and you could have been handing out the champagne and the canapes and
Can you imagine, Damon? Imagine Simon Lazenby hanging around James Hunt. I mean, recipe for disaster.
We've got to stop this. We've got to stop this. This isn't like.
I'm not sure they would have. Simon, I'm not sure they would have won at Zandvoort if they'd had you in the team. I don't mean to be rude.
No, you're quite right. I've got my teddy bear T-shirt upstairs somewhere. Thank you, everybody. You're not locked down, are you, PDR? So what have you got planned for this weekend? Lots of running in the sunshine.
Yeah, taking the kids out on their bikes this afternoon. Now they've got a bit of fresh air every day. You've got to do the same thing. So, yeah, just get out and about, Simon, and see what it's about. But you're starting to get into it a bit, aren't you? Starting to see some kind of light at the end of this tunnel. But it's nice to see the world moving. And the more each day goes on, the more you see. The only thing that's a bit annoying is the construction site next door is at it 12 hours a day and doing stuff at night. So
don't let it get you down.
Always.
Don't let it get you down. I can't believe that, Damon. You'd have fit right in there, a bunch of amateurs. I'll take that, by the way, to this weekend. Honestly. Damon and PDR Rage, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We will see you again for the live show on Monday, 2 o'clock, Sky Sports News and Sky Sports F1. Enjoy the weekend. It's going to get warmer.